Shyamalan movie, The Village. Michael, I think this is legitimate. This is because to buy into this is to buy into that, that M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village. I've got to believe, and I think it's horrific to bring such a burden on the living relatives of family members who died on that flight.
Was why could I not fly home from Toronto? But Osama bin Laden's family and some Saudi nationals whose names I still don't know were flown out of the country in our airspace. I was grounded. They were not. I asked her that day, where was NORAD? Where were our defense systems? And instead she told the 2 minutes of the beautiful story I told about my fierce loving daughter. And that's what it's been like for 5 years. The first thing members of the press always ask me, and sometimes individual family members will ask me, where are the rest of the family members? Why aren't you all questioning? And I will tell you that for 5 years in my small community in upstate New York, I've been posing questions. And my kids have been loved by some and shunned by others because their mother is a conspiracy theorist. I am not a theorist. I was a theorist at the Syracuse University for 22 years when I taught writing and rhetoric and American public discourse. And I can't do that anymore. I haven't seen my daughter in 5 years, except that she is the screensaver in my mind. And this government has made me a victim of conspiracy theories because they haven't answered fully or allowed anyone to ask the true questions of September 11th. And that's what I'm asking from you today. For exposure. We are not crazy. We have questions. We demand answers.
This idea that maybe they're living somewhere and they're going to come running in with a Hollywood ending.
I'm glad you bring up the relatives and the family members because the firefighters, for example, sued and lobbied congressmen for hearings about the radios and an illegal contract with Motorola in New York City. And they have asked specifically their representatives to hold hearings with subpoena power on the Hill.
We had hearings. They were 9/11 Commission hearings. Look, I want to be fair to you, but I've got to bring in Steve Emerson.
We're talking about first responders.
I hear you.
We talked about believing the sheriff on the border. What about the firefighters who have asked for their day?
I appreciate you being here.
And their hearings.
Steve Emerson, come in here, bring some sanity to my conversation. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Michael.
I mean, is this just part and parcel of a major catastrophe?
Listen, in any catastrophe, you're going to have sometimes irreconcilable statements because people's memories aren't exactly, they don't reconcile each other all the time. They don't confirm each other. However, in the statements that this man just made, I can tell you, one, that FEMA definitely, Federal Emergency Management Association, definitely concluded that World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed because of the collapse of number 1.
The September 11th Commission report does not mention World Trade Center number 7 because it can only be explained as controlled demolition. FEMA presented the following absurd story. 1. Power to the Twin Towers was wired from the substation in World Trade Center 7 through 2 separate systems. The first provided power throughout each building, the second provided power only to the emergency systems. In the event of fire, power would only be provided to the emergency systems. This was to prevent arcing electric lines igniting new fires and to reduce the risk of firefighters being electrocuted. There were also 6 1,200 kilowatts emergency power generators located in the 6th basement B6 level of the towers, which provided a backup power supply. These also had normal and emergency subsystems. 2. Previous to the collapse of the South Tower, the power to the towers was switched to the emergency subsystem to provide power for communications equipment, elevators, emergency lighting in corridors and stairwells, and fire pumps and safety for firefighters. At this time power was still provided by the World Trade Center 7 substation. 3. Con Ed reported that the feeders supplying power to World Trade Center 7 were de-energized at 9:59 a.m. This was due to the South Tower collapse which occurred at the same time. 4. Unfortunately, even though the main power system for the towers was switched off and World Trade Center 7 had been evacuated, a design flaw allowed generators designed to supply backup power for the World Trade Center complex to start up and resume an unnecessary and unwanted power supply. 5. Unfortunately, debris from the collapse of the North Tower, the closest tower, fell across the building known as World Trade Center 6, and then across Vesey Street, and then impacted World Trade Center 7, which is at closest 355 feet away from the North Tower. 6. Unfortunately, some of this debris penetrated the outer wall of World Trade Center 7, smashed halfway through the building, demolishing a concrete masonry wall in the north half of the building, and then breached a fuel oil pipe that ran across the building just to the north of the masonry wall. 7. Unfortunately, though most of the falling debris was cold, it manages to start numerous fires in World Trade Center 7. 8. Unfortunately, even with the outbreak of numerous fires in the building, no decision was made to turn off the generators now supplying electricity to World Trade Center 7. Fortunately, for the firefighters, someone did make the decision not to fight and contain the fires while they were still small, but to wait until the fires were large and out of control. Otherwise, many firefighters may have been electrocuted while fighting the fires. 9. Unfortunately, the safety mechanism that should have shut down the fuel oil pumps which were powered by electricity upon the breaching of the fuel line failed to work, and fuel oil diesel was pumped from the Solomon Smith Barney tanks on the ground floor onto the 5th floor, where it ignited. The pumps eventually emptied the tanks, pumping some 12,000 gallons in all. 10. Unfortunately, the sprinkler system of World Trade Center 7 malfunctioned and did not extinguish the fires. 11. Unfortunately, the burning diesel heated trusses 1 and 2 to the point that they lost their structural integrity. 12. Unfortunately, this then somehow caused the whole building to collapse, even though before September 11th, no steel frame skyscraper had ever collapsed due to fire. Even FEMA doesn't believe this blithering barrage of bullshit, as is apparent by their stated that this scenario has only a low probability of occurrence and further study is needed. You must agree, it is absurd, isn't it?
As far as the Pentagon, there were 100 forensic specialists and others identified who identified 184 of the 189 people.
If you know anything about the physical evidence that proves a Boeing 757 hit the Pentagon on September 11th, then you know there is none. You also are aware that when the subject of why are there no airplane pieces consistent with a Boeing 757 at the Pentagon crash site, the response is, there are a lot of eyewitnesses who said they saw a 757 hit the Pentagon. Obviously, an airplane missing from an airplane crash site means nothing to the folks hawking the official lie of September 11, 2001. Rational people understand that finding airplane pieces at a Boeing 757 crash site is significant in proving that a Boeing 757 crashed there. We found this article and thought we would put these words to video. By David McGowan. Editor's note, a popular hobby of late among some September 11th researchers seems to involve disparaging the efforts of, and questioning the motives of, those researchers who refuse to ignore the fact that the available evidence is entirely inconsistent with the crash of a jetliner at the Pentagon. These individuals generally refer to certain other Pentagon investigators as no-plane theorists. For the purposes of this article, I have adopted a name for them as well, tattoo theorists. This appellation is, of course, an homage to the Fantasy Island character best known for the tagline, Z-Plane. Zeppelin. Consider the following list of self-described witnesses: Gary Bauer, Paul Begala, Bobby Emerald, Mike Jerson, Alfred Rennery, and Greta Van Susteren. Many of them need no introduction, but let's run through the list anyway. Gary Bauer, talking head and former Republican presidential candidate who has been linked to the notorious Project for a New American Century. Paul Begala, Democratic Party operative and nominally liberal punching bag on CNN's crossfire. Bobby Emerald, President and Chief Executive Officer of Grand Old Party USA, a portal of right-wing propaganda. Mike Jerson, Director of George W. Bush's speechwriting staff. Alfred Rennery, President of Rennery Publishing, another portal of right-wing propaganda, one that has seen fit to bestow upon the world the literary stylings of Ann Coulter, the Swift Boat veterans, and numerous other accomplished liars. Greta Van Susteren, nominally liberal legal analyst for Fox News. I don't know if the tattoo theorists are aware of this, but all of the people on that list share at least one thing in common: they are all professional liars. It is their job, individually and collectively, to lie to the American people. On a daily basis. They are, by any objective appraisal, propagandists for the state. So, if all of them are selling the same story, in the face of compelling evidence to the contrary, it is probably best to assume that they might not be telling the truth.